James, I think I love you. Literacy, James. James, your average high school graduate reads at a 6th grade level. Your basketball players decrying racism, making 30 million a year, all while wearing sneakers made from slave labor. Now here's something for you. Right now, your world currently has 40 million slaves, more than the Romans had at the height of their empire. Wanna know the best part though? Half of those? Half are sex slaves, James. As for hate speech, well, you wanna hear some irony? We didn't even come up with that one. You did it all by yourself. Sometimes you amaze even us. Bottom line is you're done. It's over. That's it. And we did it all right to your face, James. And now there is evil everywhere and no one even cares. Proving that we achieved our goal. Slowly, with your movies, TV, and your media, we desensitized you. Redirected your worldview to the point that you don't even recognize evil right when it's right in front of your face. More to the point, James, you don't even feel it when you're doing it. And as for winners and losers, well, it gets decided at the time of death. The exact numbers are a closely guarded secret, but there are more of you ending up at my master's house than with the enemy. A lot more, Jimmy. Nefarious. Edward, listen to me. You're making a mistake. Okay, you're playing a game that if you lose, everything you just described is gonna happen. Dr. James Ansel Martin. Could I have a bacon double cheeseburger? Well done. And fries. Could I have chocolate shake? Extra thick, please. Please don't mess it up. It's important to me. Please do. Edward Wayne Brady. So we've already discussed a few movies about demonic possession. I've talked about Fallen, that starred Denzel Washington and was directed by Gregory Hoblit. I've also talked about the film Event Horizon, which was about a demon-infested spaceship near the edge of our solar system and what many consider to be a worthy prelude to the Warhammer 40,000 tabletop wargame franchise. However now, I'd like to talk about another movie about demonic possession. No, it's not Exorcist Believer, nor does it have anything to do with the Conjuring franchise. Hi, hello, and welcome again everybody to another episode of Natural Juan. This time around, we're going to be discussing the film Nefarious, based on the book A Nefarious Plot by Steve Deese, directed by Carrie Solomon and Chuck Konzelman, and stars Jordan Belfi and Sean Patrick Flannery. Before all that though, I'd like to acknowledge our sponsor Dermhaven. Remember, proper skincare can always make a great impression. Heck, with good skincare, even a demonic person can be mistaken for an angel. Also, I'd like to make a quick shout out to Mr. Jonathan Green, a longtime supporter of this channel. Alright, now that that's out of the way, let's find out for ourselves just who is Nefarious. As I've mentioned before, I'm quite a fan of religious horror. From films like Insidious, The Conjuring, and there's franchises like Warhammer 40,000, all of them have a special place in my heart. Though, as one YouTuber, Ryder the Omniscient, would like to put it, where are the actual religious horror films made by religious people? The problem with that is that some Christians, regardless whether Catholic or Protestant, tend to have a negative outlook on horror in general. Many of them think that portraying evil in a film or a game is evil in and of itself. This is ignoring the fact that the Bible itself depicts evil within its own pages, though it does not glorify it, and instead warns against its influences and consequences. I was pleasantly surprised though when I discovered the film Nefarious, which was based on the book a nefarious plot written by Steve Deese and directed by Carrie Solomon and Chuck Konzelman, the same people behind the God's Not Dead films. It stars Jordan Belfi as psychiatrist James Ansel Martin and Sean Patrick Flannery, who I remember well, or who we all remember well, as the albino character Powder in a film of the same name, as both the demon Nefarious and his nervous wreck of a host, Edward Wayne Brady. However, before we proceed, let me tell you that this is not your run-of-the-mill demonic possession horror movie. Taking cues from films like Fallen and books like The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, the same person who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, Nefarious has very few overt supernatural elements. As some viewers have commented, there are some incidents that can be easily attributed to coincidence and psychological issues, while there are a number of instances that are heavily implied to be unnatural in nature. It still leaves a lot for the viewer to decide on their own. It is also not unlike the film The Man from Earth with its fairly minimalist cast. It even goes a step further by having just two main actors, which is reminiscent of the first Saw film, although that franchise went downhill real quick with its excessive violence and gore. There are more than a few extras, but what's most essential to the plot are these two men and one very evil spirit and their long conversation before the end. As a warning though, this video will be loaded with spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie, please go see it first. Should you choose to continue watching this video, you are doing so at your own risk. So, you don't mind spoilers then? Okay. Again, unlike most films of similar nature, Nefarious doesn't focus on a child or any other innocent, but is instead about a man by the name of Edward Wayne Brady, who has been charged with multiple counts of murder and is now on death row for all the crimes that he has committed. Truth be told though, one can probably sense the innocence in Edward Wayne Brady in the few moments when the demon allows him to speak. A far cry from the vicious killer everyone seems to believe he is, he comes off more like a child trapped in a man's body, which somewhat still plays into the concept of the possessed being an innocent victim. This also heavily hints, but doesn't state outright, that the demon has stolen much of his childhood, leaving him stunted and immature as it has controlled and inhabited him for most of his life. Of course, others also theorize that his childishness might just be a mental disorder, or perhaps a result of experiencing too much trauma. A psychiatrist, Dr. James Martin, is sent to speak to Edward Brady in order to assess his mental condition. If he is shown to be mentally unfit, his execution will be cancelled and he will be moved to a different prison. Should he prove sane, however, then he will proceed to be executed as per the state law. Making matters worse is that he will be slain via electric chair, as it is still available to inmates in the state should they choose it. In a later discussion with Dr. Martin, the demon informs him that it chose the electric chair so that it can maximize the suffering of its host. This is very reminiscent of the Green Mile books by Stephen King, but what makes this worse is that the option of lethal injection, which is nothing to scoff at either, is available to prisoners, but the demon took the trouble of making Edward Brady suffer as much as possible. As for the demon itself, the one that calls itself Nefarious but eventually settles simply with Nefarious, isn't the usual depiction of a demon either. As stated, it doesn't use anything supernatural or even anything beyond the ordinary for that matter. Also, unlike Azazel in Fallen, it never shouts or uses profanity of any kind. The subtle hints that it is something other than Edward Brady can be seen in the change in its voice, becoming more commanding in tone, and the near bottomless knowledge that it displays. And there's the constant twitching and spasming of Edward Brady's face that implies that whatever is controlling Edward Brady's body isn't accustomed to controlling human facial muscles. That said, while it very rarely raises its voice, its manipulative nature and utter and complete cruelty towards Edward Brady cements its identity as a demon. It can be seen in how it callously denied Edward Brady's last meal, which I might add sounded something like what a child would want, by telling a guard that it wasn't hungry and it didn't want anything to eat. This later leaves Edward Brady bawling in tears when he learns that he won't be getting a last meal at all. Being interviewed by Dr. Martin, Nefarious reveals that it gained control of Edward Brady when he was only a child quite easily, as he was unbaptized and gullible enough to commit petty crimes for the evil entity. Getting Edward Brady to commit even more horrifying things was a downward tumble for the poor man, as the demon offered temptation after temptation to him. By the end, Edward Brady had become subjugated, with all the demons of hell gaining access to his body, and that he is now assured of going to hell upon death, due to the concessions he has made with the demons. Dr. Martin, while he means well, and is depicted as highly competent and good at his job, is an atheist and can't fully grasp the true nature of Nefarious until it is too late. I would like to offer kudos for those who made this film for not talking down to people who did not share their beliefs, since, while James, or Jimmy, Martin is shown to be an atheist, he is depicted as a struggling good man who would otherwise have succeeded were it not for the fact that his current patient is possessed by a real demon. It is shown, time and again, that Dr. Martin really did try his best to save Edward Brady, even assuring him that he could save the man if he could just tell him a way to make the demon go away or leave them for a short moment. Unfortunately, Nefarious shows up at the last minute to ruin Dr. Martin's plans, going as far as to break Edward Brady's finger as punishment with his own hands, no less, for trying to save himself. Now, depending on your views of Christianity, since I'm aware that not everyone watching my videos are Christians, regardless whether Catholic or Protestant, Dr. Martin comes off as someone doing the best he can, but is utterly out of his depth when facing an opponent like Nefarious. Even when the demon points to the euthanizing of his mother and the abortion of his baby, Dr. Martin still doesn't completely lose his grip on the moral high ground. It is only near the very end, when Dr. Martin signs the waiver stating that Edward Brady is fully sane and should be executed, does he truly lose the moral battle with Nefarious. For in doing so, he consigns an otherwise innocent and pitiable man to death, even though he knows that that is clearly not the case. Now, as for my 2 cents, unfortunately, considering what this film stirred in me, it's more like $100 than just 2 cents. First and foremost, like, wow, what a movie. While not flashy like most demonic possession films with spinning heads, projectile vomiting, and gratuitous profanity, there's a definite dread that this film inspires. When Nefarious discusses how they managed to desensitize mankind into committing evil and how easy it was for them to manipulate Edward Brady into the childish wreck we see, it really struck a chord in me. This was made even worse by the scenes where Nefarious denies its host the last meal that he wanted, and had me crying for days when I kept going back to the scene where Brady's begging that he didn't say he didn't want the meal. Now, in most movies and games nowadays, tabletop or computer, most demons tend to be portrayed as just generic monsters. Think Diablo of the franchise of the same name and the Balrog from the Lord of the Rings film trilogy. However, I will state that there's some resemblance between Nefarious and Edward Brady to Gollum and Smeagol at least. That said, the extra cruelty that Nefarious put its host through is some of the most heart-wrenching instances that I will likely never forget. From the beatings he has to endure throughout his life, the times he was sent to solitary confinement, and to the aforementioned denial of his last meals, all of these were depicted as the result of Nefarious's cruelty. The film shows that while he might not be immediately and visibly evil to onlookers, he is a vicious creature that refuses to let the possessed man have any kind of relief or happy moment. As mentioned, the film also doesn't put down non-Christians in that it portrays Dr. Martin as a competent man and that the achievements of mankind that he points to is still legit despite what Nefarious might say. A few examples I could state is that even though it's true that the majority of high school graduates read at a 6th grade level, they are at least reading, and that there are more literate people in the world today than there ever was in history. Another would be that even though slavery still exists, most developed countries are working hard to eradicate it completely, and comparing the slaves of the Roman Empire, which didn't actually conquer the entire world, to the slave crisis of the world today, and not to mention that most civilized people of this age frowns upon the concept of slavery and will likely report perpetrators of slavery to authorities, is rather unfair. Racism and hate speech, while they still exist and are still prevalent in some places, are being actively fought through efforts to make workplaces more inclusive and diverse in developed parts of the world. Even the topics of euthanasia and abortion are somewhat muddled in the film, since one can argue that they are out of Dr. Martin's hands. Although yes, as a Catholic, I think he should have just taken care of his mother and accepted the responsibility of fatherhood. But even these just come off as ammunition for Nefarious to use. The only time he really failed, in my opinion, was when he chose to label Edward Brady as sane and fit for execution, as, in a sense, this can be considered a form of murder, since Dr. Martin knew otherwise, and Edward Brady wasn't likely in full control of himself when he committed the murders he was accused of. Overall, the film really shows how good acting with a convincing atmosphere can achieve so much without using too much star power, as they do here in the Philippines, or using too much special effects, as is the case with a lot of Hollywood films. I think you could do the same thing with a Marvel movie about Venom and Carnage with Eddie Brock just interviewing Cletus Cassidy in prison. I hope that other filmmakers could learn a lot from this movie, and I hope to see more films using this format. As for the cons, or not so good parts of the film, I think they could have removed a lot of the supernatural elements of the film without changing much of anything. For instance, as already stated by Dr. Martin, Nefarious's knowledge could just be a trick that he doesn't fully understand yet. Perhaps he is just very good at doing research through the free time given to him with computers that are available in the prison, or has a loyal accomplice either within or without where he is being kept. Even the scene at the end wherein Dr. Martin gets possessed could be chalked up to the power of suggestion, and that the execution could have triggered some sort of psychological breakdown in him. Dr. Fisher, Dr. Martin's predecessor, who was shown falling to his death at the start of the film, could have just been shown without the strange skewed frame. I think it would have worked better if his so-called suicide was depicted as something more ambiguous. For instance, he could have just taken his life because of a previous case that he feels he failed in. Lastly, the woman at the end was a real downer. It came off as funny rather than menacing, as I assume it was supposed to. I think it would have been more effective if the woman simply copied Nefarious's mannerisms, such as its facial tics and spasms, rather than simply using the original's voice. They could have just used the actress's own voice, dropped to a lower pitch, with Nefarious's condescending tone. Anyway, that's it for this episode of Natural Juan. I sincerely hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe to my channel and hit that bell if you want to see more content like this. If you also want to support my channel and what I do here, my PayPal, Patreon, and Gcash information are in the description below. Natural Juan,